Hey Genderqueer chat, it's Thursday and this is Matt, and this week's topic is a really interesting one, and it's one that I came up with, but I think maybe some of the others are having some difficulty with the topic in answering it, maybe in part because the terms and the ideas are not exactly commonplace. I may have also not worded the question very well, so hopefully I'm going to try and explain what I think about this topic and explain the topic. Hopefully that will clear it up a little bit, but having said that, this is like my 45th attempt at trying to record this video, so I am also having a lot of trouble in trying to get out what I want to say. So I'll give it another shot, and I'll try and keep things as simple as possible. So the question is, Girlfags and guy-dykes. Have you ever met anyone who identifies this way? And do you think, or do you see any parallels between these identities and genderqueer expressions of sexuality? So yeah. Girlfags and guydykes, if you're unaware of these particular terms, and I came across these terms quite early during my exploration of my gender identity. I was actually looking at definitions of transgender and genderqueer on Wikipedia, Wikipedia being the source of all knowledge and information in the world. And I think Girlfags was actually a link at the bottom of the genderqueer page. So I kind of clicked on that and had a look at it, and I was really interested and intrigued by the concept of a person being born in a particular body with a certain physiology, also identifying in line with that, with the gender that they were assigned with at birth, but identifying differently, viewing themselves in kind of romantic relationships or sexual relationships in a different way. So identifying with a sexuality that's not commonly associated with or seen as being a good fit with their body. So a girlfag is essentially a female assigned at birth person, generally a cisgendered female, who has an enduring or strong romantic or physical attraction to gay men, or a strong affinity with sort of gay society. A guy-dyke, on the other hand, obviously is a male assigned at birth person, a cisgendered man who has enduring or strong romantic or physical attractions to lesbian or bisexual identified people, or sort of a strong affinity with lesbian culture. So yeah, these identities are kind of interesting to me, and I do see that there's some parallels or connections with the experiences of some genderqueer people and what we may go through as well. So I haven't actually met any people who have identified as girlfags or guy-dykes. One time in a gay bar, one of my friends came up to me and was like, "Oh, there's somebody over there who's just like you." And I kind of thought they must have been meaning like a trans person or a genderqueer person, and around that time was the time that I was really trying to explore and find the terms that fit me. But in retrospect, what I realised they were referring to was a male-bodied person who identified as lesbian, and that's obviously what they were doing in a queer space like that. And I guess that kind of model of sexuality has been not popularised, but it's been shown in the TV show The L Word. So if you've ever watched The L Word, you know that in the first season there's a character called Lisa. Lisa is essentially a guy-dyke, or as they call him in the show, a lesbian identified male. So he's a male-bodied person who identifies as a man, but also at the same time views his sexuality, the way that he expresses himself, sexual identity-wise, is that more in line with sort of a lesbian identity. So he's a lesbian identified male-bodied person. And that particular character is kind of fun, but also not really looked into with any great depth. He's kind of a sidelined character that's just there to, I don't know, I think it's just there as a juxtaposition to sort of bisexual sexual identities and to sort of make a point of that. So it's not particularly a well-rounded character or a well-interpreted character, but at least there is a sort of pop culture expression of that particular sexual identity. So how does that relate with sort of genderqueer expressions of sexuality? Keeping in mind that, first of all, as genderqueer people, we all express our sexuality, our attractions, our relationships, how we view ourselves, how we wish to be viewed by others in a myriad of different ways. A genderqueer person can be, straight, gay, queer, any kind of sexuality type label that you wish. And there's no one way to be to express your sexuality in a genderqueer sense. And also, we also make the point of always differentiating that sexual identity or sexuality and gender identity are two distinctly separate things. But also for some people like myself, if you've ever watched any of my previous videos, you know that I kind of came to my gender identity through looking at my relationships and interacting with people on a more intimate level, and the way that my own attractions and sense of sexuality, although I didn't think of it in that way, was evolving and changing over time, and how I really viewed myself in that sense. So for me, there was that interconnectedness and interplay between gender identity and sexuality, and that was a very difficult thing to untangle and to separate. And yeah, it's probably why ideas like Girlfag and guy-dyke have probably stuck in my mind, and why I'm kind of interested in them, and like to draw some comparisons and connections between that and the genderqueer experience, because that's the angle that I was coming from. So I don't identify as a guy-dyke, of course, but I can see some similarities with the way that I experience myself. I do experience my sexuality. I sort of look around, and the closest thing that I can see to my brand of sexuality, how I feel like I can express myself or how I want to be seen, is sort of mirrored in a stereotypical fashion in sort of lesbian relationships and lesbian expressions of sexuality. So I call myself a lesbian, even though to me it's more of a function of my gender identity than an actual sexuality, and that may be part of the difference. But I can kind of get how somebody's physical body, whether or not they identify with that, whether or not they are cis or trans or genderqueer, to have a physical body comes with a bunch of assumptions, and some of those assumptions are to do with sexuality. So it's perfectly okay for a male-bodied person to be attracted to straight women and be, heteronormative, be straight. It's almost as perfectly okay for a male-bodied person to be attracted to gay men and be homosexual and have gay relationships. Like, by okay, I mean we have the language for it, we understand what it is. Not all of society agrees with it or sees it as okay, but it's a thing. But for a male-bodied person to identify with a more feminine version of sexuality, identify as a lesbian, be attracted to lesbian-type people, whether or not they're cisgendered or whether or not they're transgendered and view themselves as that gender, so therefore maybe it's kind of a same-sex relationship. Like, it's just not the done thing. Like, there's not really that language for it. There's a lot of blurring of the lines, and I would imagine that people who identify that way may experience levels of discrimination, or may just find it difficult to be able to express themselves freely and honestly and openly in straight or queer spaces, because people don't get that. So yeah. So yeah, a girlfag or a guy-dyke probably identifies, or I would assume identify, more closely with their actual gender assigned at birth, but still face that problem of being in a body that is somewhat incompatible with what people generally view as the done thing for that particular sexuality. But I think it's totally okay for people to be able to express themselves sexually however they want, and it is a matter of finding the terms that suit you. We know that lesbian generally means female-bodied on female-bodied. That's kind of the thing, but I kind of see sexuality, lesbianism, gay, whatever, as kind of a broader thing. It's less about just that bodies in the traditional sense, and is more a complex way of how you view yourself in relationships, what you're attracted to, what you're looking for, how you wish to be perceived, as well as things like community and culture, and just fitting in and feeling a place where you feel safe and secure. So I think it's perfectly valid for anyone to use any particular term, but of course going to maybe come up against some kind of conflict or whatever. Yeah, that was really scrambled. I'm not sure what I just said. Hopefully it made sense, but yeah, I definitely see that there are some parallel issues there, to do with bodies, to do with genders, and to do with the way that, most of all, to do with the way that other people perceive you, the way you express yourself, the way you present yourself, and whether or not your particular expression of sexuality, whether it's your own sort of expression of sexuality as a genderqueer person, or if you're a girlfag or a guy-dyke, that's completely legitimate, and you should be able to, but society doesn't always see it that way. So yeah, it's kind of murky waters, but it's just a matter of having that language, I guess. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Hopefully that made some sense and I cleared it up, but yeah, thanks for watching, and See you next week.